All right, everybody, welcome back to another Identical Draw podcast. This episode, we have a good buddy, Erik Barber. He works at Vortex Optics.
He's their content manager.
Yep, he got his start in the industry with Midwest Whitetail. Did that, filmed and hunted with a lot of those guys for many years, and been doing the Vortex Optics thing now for a while. He was kind of one of our first points of contact there, and we've worked with him for several years now and done some hunts with them. We've done a couple turkey hunts, got a couple whitetail hunts with them this fall coming up. But man, we were in his house this spring when we were up there turkey hunting, and what do you see on the walls, Tom?
A lot of bucks, a lot of big deer,
of bucks,
a lot of sheds. He's all around hooked to the outdoors.
If you go to his Instagram at Erik Barber, something along those lines, he's shot a lot of deer, and he's always seems to be a consistent killer, especially early season.
Early season, very much so. In his home state of Wisconsin, I mean, he can dissect public land as good as anyone. So we have him on to discuss Wisconsin, where he's out of, Iowa, and then the 80. And he has some really great points that he brings up. So if you're just listening to this, you can also watch us on YouTube. So that might give you a better idea of the properties we're talking about, because you'll be able to see them on there.
Again, like we said with the last podcast, if you have a property that you want some of these professionals to talk through where they'd hunt and things like that, you need to message us.
Maybe it's your own personal 40 and
comment something.
You'd love to. You're having a hard time. Yeah, send it to us. Like, no spot burning. We'll just pull it up on the screen, and people will be able to dissect it for you.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's get into the podcast with Erik. I was thinking one day, I was like, man, we need to get some of the best whitetail hunters we know and basically have them actually talk us through, like, looking at new country. Maybe they've hunted before, maybe they haven't. We're just picking random spots on the map and actually talk through, like, I want to know where you're going to sit. Like, obviously, there's a lot of different things of, like, you're not, like, walking the woods, and, like, things can change so quickly if you bump a buck or you see a sign that you just can't pass up or something, depending on pressure. But, like, we just want to see, like, where certain guys are just, like, intrigued on the map. So this Wisconsin piece, what time of year would you normally be hunting Wisconsin? Like, what's, like, a realistic time period? I mean, you start getting interested in October, September?
I always hit Wisconsin hard at the opener, like that September 16th opener.
Yeah.
And so, like, this year I drew Iowa. So I'm going to spend a lot of time in Wisconsin from, like, September through probably, like, mid-October. But, like, on just a normal year, like, I would be burning a lot of time in Wisconsin early September, and then I would be, like, looking at it for the rut.
Cool. Okay. So for this Wisconsin piece, when you look at the piece, I don't know if you have it up, you can get it up. Like, basically, tell us, like, what time period would interest you to hunt that property, and then how you'd go about hunting that property. Cool. And basically what I want is, like, give us a spot A, and then give us a spot B for backup.
I guess for people just listening to the podcast, one, you should be watching it on YouTube. Two, it's this piece. We're not gonna spot burn any of these pieces, but we'll tell you it's in the state of Wisconsin, and it's kind of it's a unique look. So go on YouTube, you can kind of see how it's shaped. But Erik's gonna break down a little bit how he'd hunt it.
Yeah. So I mean, guys, when I look at this thing, like, there's a couple things that stand out immediately. The first one is that creek that borders the road. And when I look at the creek, that is water that's going to be in that thing at all times. So I don't know what the depth of that's going to be. So, like, if I'm going to that for the first time, I'm going to bring something like hip waders. I love to see that, because that a lot of times, like, especially on a really wet year, it's going to keep a lot of people out because people just don't want to deal with that stuff. So
Yeah.
for me, like, as far as like timing goes, my approach to this is going to be probably a little bit different than most. I'm going to like really look at this thing hard from like we're 2023 this year. So our opener is September 16th. I'm going to look at this very hard through September. And the reason for that is one, the mosquitoes are always worse in September, keeps people out of the woods, and the hunting pressure is always lighter, and that makes it a little bit easier, in my opinion, to find those things. So when I look at this, it's a unique shape. You've got that long chunk that like runs north and south, and it kind of drops down and then comes up to that ridge top on the very south end. And initially, my eyes immediately went to the big like oak flat on the northeast side of the property. I'm assuming that's an oak flat. There looks to be some kind of crop on there. And
Yeah.
I would definitely get up there. I'd spend some time on that. That would probably be like, that's my knee jerk reaction, is to get up on that flat, maybe on one of those points where that ridge kind of starts to roll back down to the north. But honestly, the spot that kind of seems the most out of the way and the most unique to me is that point down on the south. I don't know what those trees would be. I don't know if that's oaks up there. It actually looks like it might even be an intermix of like oaks and like some cedars, some like
Yeah.
thick bedding up on that
Mhm.
southeast corner of it. But I'd be really curious. I've found a lot of times, obviously the it's no secret that deer kind of like to bed with the wind at their back looking downhill. Here in this part of Wisconsin, we get a lot of like westerly or northerly prevailing winds. So I could definitely see a buck being bedded on that point. And knowing that there's a house just right below it, I bet that guy's never going up there. Like I find a lot of times those bucks can just sit on those points. They almost like that sense of security of, hey, there is a little bit of activity around here.
Yeah.
Especially when they know that activity doesn't actually like come up and actually hunt them. So that would be a spot that I would definitely throw a sit at on that southeast corner for sure.
That looks
So
good because I think with wind, I mean, getting into wind direction a little bit, um, I mean, I I feel like that south piece you'd be able to get away with a little bit and be able to basically I know a lot of that chunk in there is private on that ridge top, but like a November timeframe, you're going in south on that piece and dipping in and then calling to basically anything north, northeast of you, and you're in the money there.
so
Yep.
Eric, when you're hunting this piece, say like during that opener time frame, is there any sign or food source that you're trying to key on? Because like in my mind, I'd want to see that northeast spot and see if I could have any visibility into that crop.
Yeah.
But like I mean, is you like are you just like simply like I'm still on that summer rotation of I'm just in between food and bedding, or are there any like very particular things you're gonna try to key in on?
I'd be looking for rubs.
Yeah.
So with us opening typically like mid-September like that, it's always right around the time that the first, bucks are typically out of velvet. If not, they're like about to be out of velvet in that mid-September time frame. So any of those rubs that you find are like, that is like right now,
Yeah.
like recent intel. Um, so I'd be spending a lot of time just like what I'd probably do is honestly go in there like midday, like at 11 o'clock. And even for that time of year, the days are still long. You're talking like 7:30 sunsets. So like getting in there on like an 11 a.m., 11:30, and just take that so slow. Just get the wind in a favorable direction and just kind of start walking. And I'd be looking for like the first rub that I can find regardless of size. Like I'm really not too worried. I'm not looking for like that big giant, shredded up signpost looking rub. I'm not expecting to find that. So like what I'm expecting is to find a sapling like the size of my thumb that's just like recently shredded. The
Yeah.
bark is kind of peeled back from it. Bonus points always in my head. I don't know if this is something that you guys ever think about, but like when you find those saplings that are about like thumb diameter, that are actually like snapped off. To me, that always like insinuates that that deer has like a little bit of a sign of aggression, and it's not just like casually, like just rubbing up and down. It's actually getting in there and like twisting its head around and snapping. And I know that young bucks can do that too, but I always think back to, I think it was 2018. I killed a buck on opening day, and the weekend before, the Saturday before opening day, I went in there to pull a camera, and this camera was set over an apple tree, and I had to go through this like CRP transition field in order to get this camera. And when I'm going through the CRP field, I'm noticing all these like fresh rubs, and they are fresh, like this, they just happened, and they were all like snapped up. And anyways, I pulled that camera, had a bunch of bucks on it. And then the very first night of the season, I went in there, and rather than sitting right over that apple tree, I kind of sat this little transition zone in that CRP, and I watched 5 bucks come right up out of that draw and shot one at 30 yards right at last light. And that was the first day of the season, first sit. And it was exactly based off finding that fresh intel, fresh sign. And to your point, Nate, it was like that bed to food pattern. Like he was coming from bed going to food. But the reason that I was able to identify that was through the sign that he was leaving.
Yep. That's good stuff, because I feel like early season, it's just like it's food. Like, I mean, that's the topic. But man, I've watched so many bucks just lose their minds trying to get the velvet off. And it's like that is fresh intel for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
Erik, if you are, let's say, well, I guess you've got some connections in Iowa. You've got an Iowa buck tag. If you're just like running over spots and just like running into dudes or like not seeing what you want, and you head to a new piece you've never been before, are you jumping in and like being aggressive, or are you slow and you're taking your time, hitting the corners of it with very safe wind, or are you jumping in, like going to like what seems like in this piece situation, like that northeast corner, you jumping in right away?
I'm gonna be strategic about it. Like I'm not just gonna bomb in there in the pitch black. If it's my first time in there, I'm definitely gonna wait till there's at least some daylight, even if that is first light. But I'll wait until I kind of have that enough visibility where I can see stuff like, let's call it, first week in November. So I'm looking for like what that fresh rut sign is, rubs and scrapes and all that. I want to be able to see that, but I'm still going to have my heart set on that area up there in that northeast part. I totally feel like, yep, you could catch a deer really anywhere on this piece cruising that time of year, even along that creek as close as it is to the road. I mean, it would not shock me, but I'm just going to put all my eggs in the most high odds basket. In my mind, that's like up in that northeast corner, specifically on that little spur ridge that jets out to the north and west. And what I'm going to hope to do there is hunt that on like a southerly wind, get in there, blowing that my wind back over that valley that's to the north of there, and basically hoping that I'm going to get a buck that's cruising the upper third of that contour on the south wind, trying to check that flat for any does that have kind of come up and maybe walked across that oak flat or feeding in that oak flat. It is like when you take the whole hardwood section into consideration, it is a huge flat. Like it's a big flat ridge top.
Yeah.
And I actually have had like pretty tough luck hunting those big flat ridge tops like that. Typically what I'm always looking for is that one little like spur ridge or that little like out of the way identifier that kind of like seems out of place. For whatever reason, I just, I don't know if that's what draws my interest and I naturally spend time there or what, but for whatever reason, it seems I've found most of my better sits come on those locations. And that's what I feel that that little spur ridge that kind of like jets up to the northwest offers. It was just a little bit out of the way. I'm not gonna. Here's what the last thing I would do is plop a stand right in the middle of that flat open ridge. That's like the last thing I'm going to do, because one, I guarantee someone already has one there. And two, I just don't think in a pressured public land setting, you're going to get a buck that like just traipses down that stuff. I look at that as like, it might as well be a plowed cornfield in my mind. Like it doesn't exist. I'm not going there,
Nice.
So with a small chunk that's a few hundred acres, how many trucks along that road do you need before you're like, I'm off of this piece?
Oh man, I would say if there were more than two vehicles hunting that specific spot, it would be enough for me to, turn tail and look and try to find another spot that kind of fits that mold. But looking at it, just like zooming way out, the big things that I like about it are one access, which is from the west going in east into the property, and that you have to go uphill. Those are two features that I like. If there's a recipe that I'm looking for on a property, those are two of the things that I want to see. Ideally, and this piece doesn't have it as much, but in an ideal world, there'd be one access point. Your only approach is going up, but then you would have to descend and then go up one more time. That to me, I think a lot of times is going to weed out people that just don't want to go through that extra effort. Of course, this place doesn't have it, but it still would be a place that I would absolutely look into. It's just weird enough and just out of the way enough to warrant, checking out.
Yeah, for sure.
Sweet. Nate, any other questions on this, or should we jump to property number 2?
I think we should go to number 2.
Okay. Number 2 is in the great state of Iowa.
Yep.
Just kidding.
This is a cool spot.
So for people just listening, let's see how many acres. 280 about, and it's kind of like in the shape of a question mark. Erik, similar questions. It's similar to that other piece, to the Wisconsin piece, but also different. Not just, I mean, you basically got your north and your east axis, and that's it. So I guess what jumps out at you right away?
This piece is super unique. And it's in an area that I've spent a ton of time looking at a map and no time hunting. So I don't really have a whole lot to like base it off of. But a couple things stand out right away. So where the question mark goes straight down to the bottom, like that main vein on the south kind of point, there's a ditch that kind of comes up from the south and west and kind of comes into the property. And I like that a lot. I like that it looks like that's crop all around it. Like some sort, whether it's corn or soybeans. What I would love to see here, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I'd love to show up to this and see it in standing corn. This piece is limited on timber cover. So one thing that I always like to, I ran into a situation back when I lived in Iowa, actually, in a different part of the state. I hunted a farm that was pretty limited on tree cover, and on corn years when the corn was up, I always had better photos, better hunts, more bucks living on the property, and I feel like it was directly correlated to that corn because they just felt more secure. When it was in a bean year, a lot of does, a lot of young bucks, but those mature bucks just seem to be more nocturnal and less daylight active. So, and corn is always a pain in the butt to walk through. So like when you talk about that south end of this piece, if that is in fact in corn, it's going to take a lot of work to get back there. So that is one chunk that stands out. The other chunk that stands out is actually before you would even get to that, it's kind of in the midsection where it makes that 90-degree bend. I like that a
Yep.
lot. That seems pretty cool because it's like it looks like a ridge that's kind of like dropping down. If we are talking a rut situation here, late October, early November, that's the biggest like connected portion of timber for any deer that's going to want to stay in the timber, kind of transitioning from like the northwest to the southeast or vice versa. And if it wants to stay in the timber, that's the chunk that it's going to be in. And that timber is not super deep. So odds are, if you get in that, you're going to see something. If it's using that as cover, you're going to at least get
Yep.
eyes on it, and then hopefully be able to grunt, rattle, whatever, snort, wheeze something in, and play off the seasonality and just aggression of a buck that might be passing through there. So I like that area a lot.
So
Yeah,
that's going to
man.
be I was an October 1 opener, right?
Yep.
So say you had, I mean, the entire season to hunt. Like what time frame would this property interest you?
Oh man, this one would probably be a. I mean, what I would love to be doing is I'd love to be keeping tabs on it because let's say those are soybeans and everything else in the area is yellowed up as it typically is that time of year. And maybe there's just a couple back little coves in that are still green. In that case, I'm going to want to throw a couple hunts at it early. I love that early October time frame if you can find a food source that is out of place. So late planted beans that maybe just don't get a ton of sun that stay green later than the rest of them, that kind of stuff. But assuming that that's not the case, I'm going to probably look at this as a last week of October play, and the reason there is, it's like we kind of talked about. There's not a ton of cover. You can see a super long way, so I'd love to hunt this with a decoy.
Yeah.
This would be something where I'd be spending a lot of time, whether it's one of those like two-dimensional heads-up style decoys, or getting in there with something a little bit bigger. I'd want to get in there with some sort of visual attraction and just get in a place where I can cover a lot of ground, rattle, and hopefully pull something into that decoy.
Yeah.
You could, I mean, this place has so many like dips and turns. I feel like you could hunt somewhere different every day in a week and have a different hunt. But I mean, it almost looks like some sort of like planted tree thing in the
Yeah,
south bottom. So I wonder, that'd be very interested to get back there and see what that's all about. But
Yeah, I mean a lot of food, a lot of just little timber chunks.
yeah,
One thing on that green, basically finding some of that green food is like, Tom, your first Kansas buck. I remember one of like the most things that stuck out in my mind was like our beans were so much greener than everybody's. And
yeah,
like I remember that being like so obvious. Like ours were still like looked like July beans and everybody else was fading and pretty yellow. And who knows? I think that definitely plays a role.
yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
I think that's so key. If you can find something that is just a little bit out of place and doesn't fit the rest of the mold, I think that's so key. Even another spot is I've kind of been just sitting here looking at it more, and it's a very specific spot. So right where the like seasonal water in that ditch kind of comes to an end. I'll actually kind of show you guys here, but like
Yeah,
right where this stuff comes to an end, this little chunk right up here for
yeah,
whatever reason is kind of catching my eye. And what I like about it is it looks like there's some sort of crop directly to the west of it. Even if it's just hay, it's something that's a little different. And then when you look in there, it looks like there's a ton of sunlight that gets into that little like opening. What I'm envisioning is like an opening in timber, and there's probably a lot of tall grass there.
Yeah.
It's on the south little roll of that hill, and it's not a ton of timber, and it's a very isolated spot. If I was a buck, that's probably where I'm gonna probably lay
Yep.
right about where that cursor is right there.
Yep. So, getting into wind direction a little bit, Eric, is there a wind that you're like, oh, I'm absolutely hunting this piece. What do you think on
For
that side of things?
Yeah, for that spot, that very specific spot that I just talked about there, a northwest, I'd be really excited to hunt that on a morning hunt. I think would be really cool to hunt that spot. Um, Otherwise, southwesterly, I feel like would be the safest. Um, Even a due south, I feel like a due south would be a little bit more optimal for the deer to be there than a
Yep.
southwest. A southwest works great for you as a hunter, but it's doesn't really work a ton for the deer. A due south works pretty good for a buck that's cruising that middle section of the property at that first 90-degree bend. So on a due south wind, I'd be pretty pumped about that area.
Yep.
So you're the little chunk, you're the one where you showed where if you were a buck, you'd be betting northwest wind. Are you gonna tuck down into that thick stuff? Like, are you gonna like you can kind of see where that shadow is, where it's like the bigger timber, and then kind of looks like where that it could be some grassier stuff. Are you gonna get into there? Are you gonna be on field edge trying to catch the movement along that terrain change, or where are you gonna be at?
What I'm probably going to try to do is I'm gonna assume that that deer is bedded on the high side of that tall grass.
Yep.
So kind of up on the north end of that tall grass, right where it breaks and kind of starts. You see there's some bigger trees scattered in there. I'm assuming that buck's going to be bedded in that area. And what I'm going to try to do is get above his level, or right on or just above his level, kind of at the portion where it jets out most into the field,
Yep.
right up in like that area, right up in there. And what my hope would be, that's why I would want to hunt that on a morning rather than an afternoon. I feel like that's just a place where a buck wants to be. It's there's not a lot going on there. He kind of has his own isolated spot. If you go in there in an afternoon, it would be doable, but there's also a pretty dang good chance that he's going to see you. If you get in there at 0 dark 30, and it's dark out, and it's also in the morning, especially in October, depending on the conditions the day before, you might get a little bit of a frost still, or a little, not frost, but like dew, just
Yeah.
wet grass.
Yep.
And I want that in the morning when I'm going in there, especially if I'm trying to get that close and that tight to them. I mean, it might take me uh 45 minutes to walk into that spot, and then it might take me an hour to get from the edge of the timber to 50 yards into where I'm actually going to try to get up in a tree and get set up.
Yep.
I would just want to be creeping along, not making a sound, and I feel like the mornings would offer me the best chance of doing that.
Yep.
And
Nice.
if you were to hunt this late October, obviously that's like primo sign. I mean, are you going to be like keying in pretty heavily on that stuff too, I would assume.
Definitely. Yep. Especially scrapes. I mean, at that time of year, I'm always like, for whatever reason, I just always switch to scrapes that time of year. That's the thing that I'm looking for. That's what I want to see. And,
Yep.
the fresher that those scrapes are, the better. And the more tucked into the timber they are, the better. I'm sure there's scrapes all over the edges of those fields, but if you can find that big car hood size scrape 150, 200 yards into that timber, because again, that's not super dense timber. You find that
Yeah.
one big scrape that is in the timber, that'd be something that would have me pretty excited.
Nice. Well, sweet. Nate, any more on this one?
How many vehicles until you're bouncing? Two? Let's say.
Yeah. So this one, I mean, still, if it's got three or more, it's going to be tough for me to hunt. But even if it is like, if it's, let's call it an afternoon hunt of 3 or 4 vehicles, and it's like a Friday, I've got a 3-day weekend, and I just bombed down there, and I had that spot on my crosshairs, and I show up and there's 3 vehicles, and I don't really have a backup plan. rather than just kind of driving around, I actually might run in there and not hunt per se, but I'll just try to get up on a high point, glass, see if I can, find where deer are moving. Cause again, it is pretty open, but then just as much as I'm going to be looking for deer, I'm going to be looking for people, specifically when they start coming out. Like I'm probably going to stay out there until pitch black and start looking for headlamps. And if no headlamps come out of the spot that I want to be in the next morning, I wouldn't at all feel bad about getting back there for that morning hunt.
Yeah, sure. Cool.
Awesome. Well, jump to the last piece.
This one you guys know pretty well.
Yeah, we wanted a control because we want to see what everybody says, because we're gonna have every guest on here. We want to see how they'd hunt it, and I guess we have a little more intel to fill people on, but it is kind of interesting when you look at it on the map. Like you can see our one big plot, but you really can't see much else. So
Right.
I don't know, Eric. So
for people listening, the last piece is the Kansas 80. Northeast Kansas, where Thompson and I have been hunting since 2019 when we finally got the property. We've killed bucks in October, November, and December, and haven't killed a September buck yet there. Usually we're chasing other things out west. But yeah, this is kind of the control. Just to kind of seeing if I don't know, a lot of these listeners have probably watched our YouTube stuff, so you kind of know where we probably shot deer and stuff like that. But yeah, Eric, I mean, dive into it. We can almost start out where we have with the other properties. If you're gonna hunt this piece, like what time of the year, what's exciting you? Like when are you trying to get your 2 weeks to hunt this piece?
Oh man, I feel like if I had to boil this into 2 weeks, I'd probably be showing up the 7th of November and hunting until the 21st. And those would be like the 14 days that I'd want to pick.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that would be the time, and I would just feel like there's, I looking at it on the map, the first thing that my eye goes to is the creek that kind of goes north to south. Yeah. And I would have to imagine that bucks are kind of cruising that during the rut. On day one, I'm probably not going to dive right into that because I've never been in it. I don't know what it looks like, anything like that. So call it the afternoon is November 7th. What I'm probably going to do is go in from the west, and on the looks like that's a food plot of some sort, soybean field, turnip, something like that. But like this area here might get on that east little lip that goes out, and get right on the edge of that. And even if the wind that I would kind of be wanting there is it would make sense.
The tough part.
Yes,
wind
that
is
is
so
the tough
hard
part.
in this thing.
It like you want to say like, oh, a southeast wind or an east wind, but that's that it also doesn't make a ton of sense for a buck to want to like be there on an easterly wind. He's probably wants to be there on a westerly. So if there'd be a way that you could thread a southwest breeze, maybe just straight up this point like that, and then hoping that he's somewhere bedded down in that stuff and comes out on that what would be like east section of the plot just before it starts to hourglass out on the north side. That's where I would be hoping for like an observation sit and like on November 7th or whatever. And then from there, I would start to kind of pick it apart and get in deeper. Really keen along that creek would be my kind of primary. I feel like the northeast corner of the property, there's a lot that kind of comes together there. You have a chunk that comes in from the midsection of the property, and then in the very far northeast corner, and a lot kind of comes together there. So basically right at this like convergence here where that ridge drops down and the creek kind of meets that ridge would be a spot that I'd want to be on a morning sit after I've kind of gotten a chance to figure out a little bit about what's going on, that'd be a
Yeah.
spot I'd want to be for sure.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, it's one thing that we've recognized having it is it's the wind direction is our biggest challenge because we found that it's hard to hunt just a rectangular piece that's long north to south. Because obviously your cold fronts pushing from the north. So um I mean we have hunted, I mean we've hunted I mean most of this whole 80 and um shot bucks I mean a lot. It seems like the south has been, or would you say Nate, the south has been where we've caught some movement. It's kind of strange, like looking at that basically the south east corner. It doesn't seem like there's like big woods coming into that or anything, but I do think that they might use that creek a little bit that runs
Mm-hmm.
south into our property, and for some reason, even though it's so thin, they like that and basically run it up to that northeast where you mentioned as well. And having Matt Ross and the different land consultants to the property, they like clung on to that northeast. They were like, this is where we're going to kill big bucks, and we have had big bucks use that a lot, but haven't had a great way to hunt it yet. It's just kind of been, we've bombed in there a couple times, but um, yeah, that's a unique perspective there.
Eric, I'm just sending you the pin of where Tom shot his buck this last year. I think you'll be surprised. Where you
Okay.
said your first spot, um, your first spot in the north central, kind of where that topo was changing, is one of our
Yep.
favorite spots because we really like to ride that dark topo line just because you can see down into that lower stuff and like the visibility, that's the
Sure.
best visibility in the property.
Yep. That makes sense. So then that pin that you just sent, that's where Thomas, that's where you killed that buck last year on
Yeah,
that south
yeah,
kind of west
yeah,
central kind of corner.
yeah,
That's super cool. Yeah, it is. I mean, that is the biggest thing when I look at it, and I even like got caught, my wheels were spinning there. I'm like, man, like the wind direction is going to be the hardest part here. Um, some things that I would like try to think about too. On a southerly wind, I wonder if you could try to get in on the very far north boundary and just ride that fence line all the way in, then get down into the creek and then kind of work that creek to the south. That would be something that would be on my mind a lot. Um, but then another area that I'm super intrigued about is basically due east of Thomas, where you killed that buck last year. There's another little like very subtle little spur that comes out on the east side of the creek, and that little knob just seems to be a pretty sweet spot for a buck to be hanging out too.
yep. They're very thick in that corner there.
Yeah, so Eric, I shot my 2021 buck doing that in the north. We have permission on the neighbors to the north to walk his stuff and then just jut into our ground. And we jut in like
Hmm.
50 yards maybe. And
Yep,
that's what I mean, some of our better sits there because you get in undetected and just I mean, that's basically the name of the game, and then just all really good thick cover. But we've
yep,
had
Sure.
that southeast area that you're talking. We've had cameras up there. We kind of leave that as the um, like betting zone, just let them
Yep.
do their thing back there, kind of thing. But some of our best cameras have been back in there for sure.
Yeah, I bet.
all of our, for whatever reason, all of our summer picks are always like, if you broke the 80 into like fifths, going from north to south, like that bottom fifth, we have all of our summer trail cam pictures, it seems. At least our consistent
Hmm.
ones. Like we'll have random bucks show up north and in our beam plot and stuff, but that south section, for whatever reason, they like it down there. So
Does that creek ever hold water?
it always does. Yeah,
Most
we're really lucky. Yeah.
Really? Yeah,
Yep.
that's cool. And do you guys find that it is like, does the vegetation change much down in that creek bottom? Like, is that pretty different down in the bottom as opposed to what you're finding on those ridge ridge tops and then where it's kind of dropping down?
Yeah, definitely. And the NDA guys told us that they were like finding a ton of like highly preferred stuff along that creek. So
It's
Sure.
we have tons of trail cameras along that creek during the October, November time.
and the
Yeah.
timber is also the best along that creek. It's the oldest, most mature. Because, I mean, we have old maps basically and aerials that showed that they farmed basically up to that dark topo line, like basically middle of the property.
Wow.
So that's like all hedge and locust. And then once you start dipping down to the creek, you get your hickories, you get the oaks, you get the really mature walnuts, big hackberries, all of that stuff. All of our most mature stuff is like within 50 to 100 yards of either side of that creek.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that is crazy that they were farming that much, but I can totally like now that you mention it, when you zoom in west of that dark topo line, you can actually see that
Yep.
like that's that stuff is totally different than the stuff down in the bottom. That is super interesting.
Yep.
All right, so November 15th,
Yep.
walking out with your bow in hand, your one waypoint, where would you shoot it onto the 80?
Ooh, man. One waypoint on November 15th for me is probably going. I'm probably gonna put it. What do we got for wind direction that day? What's the weather conditions doing?
I mean, you're probably going to get a north that time frame. I mean, it's probably going to be pretty chilly. Let's say it's overcast. This last year is probably a high of mid 30s during the day, dipping
Yep.
down into the upper teens, low 20s.
Yep. What I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go about. Let's see. I'm gonna measure it. Actually, it's from where Thomas killed his buck last year on a north wind. I'm gonna go about 160 yards to the north and slightly to the northeast, and put a. I'm gonna set up for the day basically right where I got those crosshairs, and uh, reason being is it's just a little bit closer to the creek there yet. It's pretty close to that main topo line that we've kind of talked about, but it is just a little bit beneath it yet. Assuming that something is kind of cruising that creek, running that, um, and I would expect to see movement. You know, basically any time of the day, coming from the north or from the south. Going
Yep.
up and down that creek, and honestly, I'd even be expecting to see like some of the bucks multiple times. Making that loop, kind of going back and forth, just cruising, looking for does. That would be where I'd put my eggs in that basket for sure.
Nice.
Cool. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. It gives some good insight. We'll see what everybody else says on that
Yep,
piece. But
I'll be curious.
yeah.
And with your guys' experience, how did I do uh, on on the 80 specifically?
Man,
No, that was really
like
good. You
the north.
mentioned
Go ahead, Tom.
I would say you mentioned things that we've done. Use that creek a ton. Like right where the topo dips off, we're heavy on those spots. Kind of the spot where you mentioned like an hourglass is like we've there's been tons of movement on that side, just being up high and looking down. Nate, I don't know, what do you want to say?
Yeah, that recognizing that the wind's just like the toughest thing. One thing you were saying is like where you'd expect the Bucks to be better than like that kind of low area by the creek, just working that area. I mean, that's literally what happened. I mean, Tom, what day did I call Babe up? November 14th?
15.
15th?
Yep. Yep.
I'll share you another waypoint. We were in a very familiar stand, and I mean, rattle them in basically. But it was
We
like
knew
out of
we
the
knew
thick,
we
yeah,
knew he was
out of the
down
thick
there.
central, just I mean, hellhole. And he came into 40, I think 44, but too thick, and just peeled out of there because our wind was so dicey. because of
Oh
the
yeah.
north south lie that uh that the property has. We were like we went in there with a marginal win because I think we had north something, but we were like we need to be here, and it's just going to be, it depends if which direction he comes at us. If he comes at us low or straight downwind, and I mean it worked. Besides, I mean 44 yards, a buck. I mean I can make that shot. Just needed to be clear, and he just was in the thick stuff still.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just like they live in that thick stuff along the creek there. But
And
yeah,
do you
I
guys
mean
deal with a lot of swirling winds down in that creek bottom?
I just sent you a waypoint or a trail cam photo of that buck that was right on us. But yeah,
Oh
there
heck yeah.
it swirls quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's, yeah,
we've got time.
seems like
You took some footage you took some footage of Babe when he came in, right?
yeah, yep,
Just add that quick in the YouTube video. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's usually pretty true on the 80, pretty much wherever you're at. But I mean, I think one thing that you can't see, and when we had Spencer Newhart hunt the ground, it's this property, it's like a bow hunter's dream because literally I'd be totally fine sitting like four dudes, at least four or five
Yeah.
dudes.
at
I mean,
least yeah,
like you'd feel alone because the topography is
Really,
way
man,
more
that's
than it looks. It's way more than it
yeah.
looks. And like even like walking along the creek is really hard because it's so twisty turny, so thick and stuff like that. That's kind of one thing that's interesting about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for an 80-acre chunk, it is about as diverse as anything you could ask for. You know, between
yeah,
tillable ground and that creek bottom, all kinds of edge. I mean, and then especially when you look at it on like the big zoomed out, like the 30,000 foot view. I mean, it's pretty telling like how those deer are going to be moving in, like a lot of north to south movement. You can kind of pinpoint a lot of those bedding areas. That's one thing, like as I've been doing this kind of exercise, as you guys have been putting me through this, like the first thing that I'll do, like after I get the pin, is like I'll back out, and I feel like that's something that people might not do enough of, but like actually look at it on the macro scale. Like so much of all this is like micro details. Like, okay, what is
yeah.
the spot within the spot? But I feel like in order to find that, like that, you know, specific area on the map, you first got to look at it very big picture and be like, okay, what are the spots that actually make sense and where should I be spending my time? And that's been interesting, just me observing as we've been kind of going through this, like a lot of the stuff that I hunt now today is stuff that I know or I've been to before.
Yeah,
So a lot of it is that macro level, like just figuring out micro level of like those fine adjustments. But yeah, looking at it on the big picture I think that's a huge thing for people to kind of about a little bit more.
that's a super good point to bring up. Just like how those deer are like really gonna use that landscape because they're like we said it a million times, deer aren't living on our 80 acres. They're really not. Like we get snippets of them being on our ground for a couple of days maybe, but then they're off gone again. And you gotta basically jump on them when they're there because they're gonna be there for I mean, we have a lot of bucks just hang around pretty consistent for a month or two and then they're gone and we see them again. But yeah, when you zoom out to the many miles, like you can see that our 80 is just it's some of the most condensed, like bigger chunks of timber. And while we want to cut a decent bit of it, like we still like we know that's what makes our 80 unique. So we leave a ton of it up. So
Totally.
And
and you
cutting it
go
to
Nate.
make it thicker too. I mean,
Yeah.
you just want it thicker with different stuff. But yeah, it's a love-hate relationship, mostly love, but it's just like, man, when you've got certain wins and you just like know there's gonna be deer out there and it's just all thick cover where I'm like, they could bed anywhere. That's like one of the toughest things that from like consuming outdoor content to actually hunting, people talk about bedding areas and they talk
Yep.
about they're gonna be, I'm like, they're gonna be on this 80. somewhere. Like that's like there's
Yeah.
no one area that is so unique. There's areas that we try not to ever go in, like that we just leave like no human contact that we hope they can bed in. But it's like it's all really good cover. It's all cover deer to bed in. They're going to be bed in certain areas just basically depending on visibility and the wind direction that day. But pick your spot, like literally throw a dart in the map because that's the hardest thing about it is like it's just not predictable where they're going to be.
Yep, for sure.
I'd say compared to like the first two properties we looked at, like pretty quickly, all of us would be like, okay, they're there, or like you had your like 1, 2, 3 kind of spots. But this one, it probably takes more of a boots on the ground to see, okay, where's the fresh sign? Where are these deer actually bedding? Because right now it just looks like 80 acres of thick timber and a creek and some topo. So that's
And
when you just got
yeah,
all that thick.
and in that November timeframe, Eric, are you going to be like, is it going to be signed, or are you just going to be like, I'm just going to get in an area where I think travel's going to be and just spend time?
Yeah, that time of year, I'm gonna hunt like funnels and terrain features that make sense. I mean, I bet you guys would agree with this. Like, if you walk through that section, there's probably not a 2 acre section that is totally void of deer sign. Like, I would imagine at that time of year, you're gonna find no matter what section of that chunk you're on, there's a rub, there's a scrape. I mean, it might not be the rub or the scrape, but I'm not really looking at it from that standpoint. Honestly, last year, that I kind of ran into that hunting northern Illinois in the last part, or sorry, the second full week in November. And it was a situation very similar to that, where like there were rubs all over the place. It was a brand new place to me, and it wasn't big. It was, I mean, relatively speaking, it was like less than 400 acre public chunk of nothing but woods and rolling hills. And the adjustments that I was making, actually, on the day that I killed my buck, the last day there, I got down and like rehung 3 different times before 2 p.m. And none of those adjustments were more than 50 yards away from like the initial tree that I sat up in that morning. The last adjustment I made, I literally got down and I walked like 6 yards from the base of the tree just to get into a different tree where I could see this trail differently. And 2.5 hours after that, the buck that I shot walked right down that trail and I shot him at 8 yards. So like I feel like the reason I bring that story up is it applies to, hey, get in an area where deer are in a terrain feature that you feel confident in, and you can adjust from there. Like, just get in the woods and then start making your micro adjustments as needed. And during the rut, like, who cares if you got to get down and adjust for it takes you 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah,
it's you're not totally blowing everything up at that time of year.
yeah, definitely.
So we can wrap it up soon. But Eric, I wanted to ask you because Thomas and I, we go back and forth in this heavily. You have the waypoint of where Tom shot his buck. It was
Yep.
okay. November 11th is like 2 in the afternoon. Just total rut buck. Where, in your opinion, we
So,
had a north wind.
so you can see
Where is that?
well, Nate, that we should say that's the shed right there. That the southwest corner, that's our shed. And I mean, what was he?
Okay.
Maybe I shot him maybe 150 yards from that shed. We were actually Graham texted us needing some photos of a scope that day. So we were messing around south of the shed and in that kind of in that timber, and like just a couple
Yeah.
hours before I shot my buck. And like you said, Nate sent you that pin. Where like I guess
Where
Nate,
is
you're
he bedded? Like, okay, one, was he bedded, or do you think he was like working one of those timber draws into the property in the south? Because basically a whole ruckus was going down. Like
Yeah.
we saw another at least like a really nice possible shooter and some does just running to the northeast, just going crazy. So Tom already grabbed his balls, like hit some grunts, and then I mean, 10 seconds later, that behemoth walks from the south behind us, like I mean, right next to us, but like technically downwind. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, we get out of the shed, we walk down there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I
bedded
guess
there.
you should
He's
say
completely downwind.
it's 230, 230. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he won. If he's there, he's completely downwind. And there's not that
Right.
much timber. So we're
No,
walking within 100 yards of him for sure, bedded. Or do you think he was just running and we caught him?
man. I mean, all signs point to like right place, right time. You guys hit the antlers together, grunted, whatever it was, and he was within
Just
earshot of
there.
that. Like,
Yeah.
that's where my head goes. But I mean, I feel like I've also seen some crazy things with like deer just bedded in like goofball spots like that. Like, even that very first piece that we talked about, that was kind of the reason I gravitated towards that one, like South Point, because I'm like, yeah, it's a weird spot. There's a house right there. I mean, what we just talked about here in this situation, that buck that you guys are talking about, Thomas, that you shot last year, I mean, that is not at all far from the shed.
Yeah,
It's
not at
kind of
all.
bringing this whole thing full circle. Like, one, he could have been bedded there in a weird spot, but two, he could have just been cruising through that stuff. And even at that, it's like, where did he come from? Because when you zoom out and look at that stuff, I mean, he would have been visible from, if he just zombie walked across that I would imagine that's some sort of like CRP grass in that pasture to the south.
Yep.
But even at that, like, I can't imagine it's a place where he would just hang out and hide, like he's probably just walking through that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you were in our shed in a back room that we have and opened up the curtains, you would have watched from the shed Tom Hart punch that sucker. It was that close. But like I always in my mind likes to wander and be like if we would have looked to the south when we were walking in there, would we have seen that dude just hanging out there? I'm like, no, I don't think they're that zoned out during the rut. But I'm like, I mean, he would have had. I mean, we were only in the tree for like 20 minutes, 15, 20
Yeah.
minutes. So I'm like,
Yeah.
he had
Unreal.
one, it's either just right time. I mean, he could have been just hauling ass, just working up there and just boom. Or he just decided to hang out there and just had bad luck. But that's
We
one
always
question I want because
Yeah.
we always joke that like those were like his first, because the property line's right there. We always joke that like those were his first couple of steps on our 80, and we just were
Yeah.
in the right spot because he's a buck. Like, he's a buck that always hangs around, and he showed up for the first time the year before on the day I killed him. So like we knew he was going to be hanging around soon. But yeah, good question, Nate.
And that was a buck that you guys obviously had seen, like, had photos of the previous year. Do you guys, during the rut, do you guys get like, I mean, you guys have put it all over the place. Would you guys say that in this spot specifically, you see more random bucks than average, about the same or less than? Like, what's that? What does that look like?
I'd say way more than anywhere else. Like
Okay.
we have our shooters going into the season, but we're always expecting like 3 or 4 more that just pop up. Some of them we catch years later, others we just never see again. So
and
Yeah.
Eric, late season on this place is stupid. Like I'm like I want to hunt. I want to hunt late October. If I could hunt like 10 days in the season, I'm going to hunt a few days late October. I'm going to hunt a few days mid-November, and then I'm going to hunt a big chunk late December, just because we have standing food, and that just if you keep food up there, it's almost like a rut. Like we have certain bucks come around the late December timeframe just because
Yeah.
we have food source, and it's almost like the rut for a lot of people. We just have mystery bucks show up that we haven't seen before.
That is super cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. But
Cool.
sweet. Well, we seriously appreciate the time running you through all these different scenarios. Hopefully for the listener / watcher, it's cool to see where some of these folks would hunt. I mean, Eric, you've killed a lot of deer. I mean, you've killed, I mean, a lot of deer. Like, I mean, look at the wall behind you. You've got plenty of bucks there hanging up. But yeah, so we seriously appreciate that. It's kind of interesting to see, I mean, where people choose what features really stick out, because everybody's looking at the same map. And I mean, if you grab 10 guys, I mean, a lot of them are going to like have those initial things stick out to them, but then there's always a slight adjustment. Like, I feel like a lot, at least for me, it's like my initial spot is like, okay, that's probably too good to be true. let's like make this a little more realistic and kind of shake it out a little bit and like choose one of those next spots. But it's great to
Yeah.
see.
Totally.
Yeah. I think one great thing that Eric also brought to the table is just like some public land hunting perspectives. Um, when to hunt, like how to hunt it if there's people there, like the staying till dark and seeing headlamps. That's something that I like hadn't really thought about much before. That's a really good point. So thanks, Eric, for letting us deep dive. Really quick, do you have some cameras out? I know you've got a couple states on the table, but any buck update
Yeah.
on your front at all?
There's one I'm going to be looking for real hard here in Wisconsin to try to find back to get after early. I don't have cameras out for that deer yet specifically, but I actually last weekend made my first quick like drive around, kind of looking for them. Saw a bunch of deer, not the one I'm kind of looking for yet. And then this
Yeah.
weekend, heading down to Iowa to get some cameras out and do some projects down there. So super pumped for to have that Iowa tag. It actually came in the mail last night, and like that just hits different when you
Yeah.
go to check the mail and that's sitting in there. It's been 5 years waiting, so the excitement level to get down and experience that is second to none right now. So I'm pretty pumped.
That's awesome.
What's gonna be your limit? I mean, you gonna shoot 4 or 5 year old or like what's your bar?
Yeah, I'm gonna. I mean, I'm super fortunate that I'm hunting in a really great spot with a good buddy of mine, and I'm gonna be holding out for definitely 4-year-old buck or older for sure. It's so hard for like I've killed one buck that scored over over 150, and that's a giant deer for anyone's book. But that's the one that I've shot that's like touched that. I've killed a slew of like what have become to known as Barber bucks, like just nice bucks. Like this tree of bucks behind me, those are the Barber bucks, and I've got
Yeah.
those things are littered through the house. So I've never been a guy that's just like so hugely focused on score. So it's gonna be super hard for me to like say no to just like a big, ugly,
Definitely.
nasty, gnarly 5-year-old, because but at the same time, like I'm just excited to take it all in and see what I see and just experience that because it is a different world.
For sure.
Awesome.
We'll see. Yeah. If you're listening or watching, leave a comment or email us at info@identicaldraw.com. We're going to have a lot more folks on to dive through a bunch of different properties where they'd hunt. And what we're going to do is if you're listening to this or watching this and you want to send us your property for somebody to walk through and to be able to show you where they'd hunt on your piece, you can do that. DM us, comment, email us, and we'll get your property. We're not spot burning. We'll just mention the state, take all the layers off and things like that. No addresses or nothing like that. But yeah, if you're interested in that, you should hit us up because we've got some good guests. So yeah, Eric, we seriously appreciate the time. That was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric.
Heck yeah, guys, it was a blast.